Candace Owens. PANICS. After John Kennedy drops the truth on live TV, the studio lights burned hot, casting a sharp glow across the sleek modern set of Real America, a late-night talk show on WJTX in Phoenix, known for its unapologetic dive into the nation's most divisive issues. The air hummed with anticipation, the kind that settles in when everyone knows something unforgettable is about to unfold. 4 chairs sat in a semicircle on the polished stage, 3 for the panelists, 1 for the moderator, who stood off to the side adjusting his tie as if it could anchor him through the storm about to break. The audience, a mix of locals and invited guests, sat hushed, their eyes darting between the empty chairs and the glowing on-air sign. Behind the cameras, producers whispered last-minute instructions, their headsets crackling with urgency. The makeup artist had just finished her final checks, dabbing sweat from nervous foreheads. Though one panelist needed no touch-up, John Kennedy, the senior senator from Louisiana, whose calm demeanor seemed to defy the heat of the lights. His charcoal suit was crisp, tailored, but understated, a reflection of a man who didn't need flash to command a room. Across from his empty chair sat Candace Owens, her posture perfect, her smile sharp and practiced, the kind that signaled she was ready to dominate. Her black dress was elegant, her hair sleek, every detail curated to project control. The third panelist, a local community leader named Marcus Tate, shifted slightly in his seat. His hands folded, his face unreadable but attentive. The moderator, David Holt, a seasoned broadcaster with a knack for steering chaos without getting burned, stepped forward, his voice smooth, but carrying the weight of the moment. "Welcome to Real America," he began, addressing both the studio audience and the viewers at home. "Tonight, we're tackling one of the most pressing issues facing our nation: race justice and personal responsibility. Our panelists bring perspectives that promise to spark real conversation." The crowd murmured a low ripple of excitement. Holt introduced the guests: Marcus Tate, a Phoenix-based advocate for criminal justice reform; Candace Owens, a commentator known for her provocative takes; and John Kennedy, a senator, whose reputation for plain-spoken clarity preceded him. As the audience applauded, Kennedy took his seat, last moving, with the deliberate ease of someone who'd faced tougher rooms than this. His eyes scanned the set, not nervously, but with the focus of a man who'd come prepared. Candace, already seated, offered a nod, her smile unwavering, but her gaze calculating, sizing him up like a chess opponent. Marcus leaned forward slightly, ready to listen. Holt wasted no time. "Let's dive in," he said, his tone professional but edged with anticipation. "Senator Kennedy, you've spoken about challenges in our justice system, particularly around fairness. Some, like Candace here, argue that personal choices, not systemic issues, are the real drivers of outcomes today. What's your take?" The question landed like a match in dry grass. Kennedy didn't rush to answer. He leaned back slightly, his hands resting calmly on the arms of his chair, his expression steady. When he spoke, his voice was low, measured, with that unmistakable Louisiana drawl that carried both warmth and authority. "David, the problem isn't that we talk about fairness too much. The problem is we don't talk about it enough until someone's life gets caught in the gears. You can't fix what you won't face." The audience stirred, a few heads nodding. Candace didn't wait for an invitation. She leaned forward, her voice sharp and confident. "With all due respect, Senator, I think that's exactly the issue. We've built a culture where every setback gets blamed on the system, on race, on anything but the individual. Look at me, I've succeeded. I didn't need to lean on victimhood to get here. It's about choices, not excuses." Her words were polished, rehearsed, delivered with the cadence of someone who'd said them 100 times before. A few claps broke out from the audience, mostly from the back, where her supporters sat. Marcus raised an eyebrow, but stayed silent, his eyes flicking to Kennedy. The senator didn't flinch. He turned slightly toward Candace, his gaze steady, but not confrontational. "That's an interesting way to frame it," he said, his tone even. "You're saying the system's fair, that it's all about personal effort. But I wonder if you've always felt that way." Candace's smile tightened just for a fraction of a second, but the cameras caught it. "I've been consistent," she replied, her voice still smooth. "The data backs me up. Opportunities are there for anyone willing to work. We've got black CEOs, athletes, entrepreneurs. The system isn't stopping anyone. It's about taking responsibility." The audience murmured again, some in agreement, others skeptical. Holt glanced at Kennedy, sensing the tension building. "Senator, your response?" Kennedy didn't jump in. He let the silence hang just long enough for Candace's words to echo back on themselves. Then he leaned forward, his hands clasped loosely. "Ms. Owens, I respect your perspective, but let me ask you something. If the system's so fair, why did you feel the need to file a complaint back in 2007 in Stamford, Connecticut?" The room went still. Candace's smile froze, her eyes narrowing slightly. "I'm sorry," what she said, her voice carrying a hint of disbelief. Kennedy didn't raise his tone. He reached into his jacket pocket, pulling out a folded piece of paper, moving slowly, deliberately, as if handling something fragile but heavy. "A discrimination complaint," he said, his voice calm but unyielding. "Filed with the Stamford Board of Education. You said you were targeted, harassed because of your race. You didn't just file it, you got a settlement." The air in the studio shifted like the moment before a storm breaks. The audience leaned forward, some exchanging glances. Marcus Tate's lips twitched, as if suppressing a reaction. Holt looked caught off guard, his eyes darting to the producers behind the glass. Candace laughed, a short, hollow sound. "That's ancient history, Senator. I was a teenager. It's irrelevant." Kennedy didn't look away. He held the paper out, not waving it, just letting it sit there, its presence louder than any gesture. "Is it?" he asked. "You said race was the reason you were targeted. You said the system failed you, and they agreed enough to pay you for it. So how do you go from that to telling folks today their experiences don't matter?" Candace shifted in her seat, her fingers brushing her lapel mic as if to steady herself. "With respect, Senator, you're digging up something from when I was young. I've grown, I've learned. That doesn't change my point. Focusing on race holds people back." Kennedy nodded, but his eyes didn't soften. "Maybe. But it sounds like you needed the system to step up for you back then. And it did. So why tell others to ignore what you couldn't?" The audience erupted in a low hum, a mix of gasps and murmurs. Holt raised a hand, trying to regain control. "Let's keep this respectful, please," he said, his voice tight. Kennedy's tone didn't change. "This is respectful, David. I'm just asking a question." Candace's confidence flickered, her foot tapping lightly under the table, a detail the cameras didn't miss. "You're twisting my story," she said, her voice sharper now. "I overcame that moment. I didn't let it define me. That's what I'm saying. People need to move forward, not dwell." Kennedy leaned back, his hands resting calmly again. "Moving forward doesn't mean forgetting what happened. You didn't overcome by pretending it wasn't real. You overcame because you called it out." The room felt smaller, the lights hotter, the tension thicker. Marcus Tate finally spoke, his voice measured but firm. "Senator, you're pointing to something real here. A lot of folks have stories like that, but not everyone gets a settlement or a platform to rewrite it. Candace shot him a look, but before she could respond, Kennedy continued. Exactly. That's the point. You got justice because you spoke up. But now you're telling others their voices don't count. That's not progress. That's a contradiction. Candace opened her mouth, then closed it, her jaw tight. The audience was riveted, the producers behind the glass exchanging frantic glances. Holt tried to steer the conversation. Okay, let's broaden this out. Marcus, what's your take on how we address these issues today? But the room wasn't ready to move on. The weight of Kennedy's words hung heavy, and Candace's usual sharpness seemed blunted, her responses slower, less certain. She straightened, forcing a smile. Senator, you're trying to make this personal. I'm talking about principles about what works for everyone. Personal responsibility is universal. Kennedy tilted his head slightly, his expression unchanged. Principles don't erase history, Ms. Owens. You stood up for yourself once. Why tell others they shouldn't? The question landed like a stone in still water ripples, spreading through the studio. Candace's smile faltered again, and for the first time, she didn't have an immediate comeback. The audience felt it, the cameras caught it, and the producers knew this was the moment the show would be remembered for. Kennedy didn't press further, didn't need to. He sat back. His point made his presence steady as ever. Holt glanced at the clock, then at the producers, sensing the segment was already slipping beyond his control. We'll pick this up after the break, he said, his voice betraying a hint of unease. But as the cameras panned out, the tension remained crackling in the air, a promise that this was only the beginning. The studio lights seemed to burn brighter as Real America returned from its brief commercial break, the air still thick with the unresolved tension from the opening segment. The audience sat on edge, their earlier murmurs now replaced by a focused silence, eyes locked on the panelists. David Holt, the moderator, adjusted his notes, his face betraying a flicker of unease as he tried to steer the conversation back onto stable ground. Welcome back to Real America, he said, his voice steady but cautious. We're diving deeper into our discussion on race justice and personal responsibility with our panel, Marcus, Tate Candace Owens, and Senator John Kennedy. Before the break, things got heated. Let's pick up where we left off. He turned to Candace, whose posture remained rigid, her smile now a thin line, calculated, but strained. Candace, you were saying personal responsibility is key. Can you expand on that? Candace seized the moment, her voice sharp and deliberate, as if determined to reclaim control. Thank you, David. Look, I'm not denying that challenges exist, but the narrative that systemic racism is the root of every problem is a trap. It tells people, especially young people, that they're powerless, that their fate is decided by forces outside their control. I've built my career on rejecting that. I grew up in tough circumstances, but I chose to focus on what I could control. My work, my decisions, my mindset. That's what got me here, not crying about the system. Her words carried the polished rhythm of a well-rehearsed speech, and a few audience members clapped, though the response felt less enthusiastic than before. Her eyes flicked toward Kennedy, daring him to counter. John Kennedy sat still, his hands resting calmly in his lap, his expression unreadable but attentive. He didn't interrupt, didn't shift in his seat, just let her words settle into the room. When Holt turned to him, saying, "Senator, your thoughts," Kennedy leaned forward slightly, his Louisiana drawl cutting through the studio's hum. Ms. Owens, I hear you on personal responsibility. Nobody's arguing against hard work. But let's not pretend the playing field is level just because you made it across. You filed a complaint in 2007 because you knew something wasn't right. You weren't just making a choice, you were demanding the system do better. And it did for you. So why tell others their demands aren't valid? The audience stirred a low ripple of agreement passing through the crowd. Candace's jaw tightened, her fingers brushing her lapel mic again. A nervous tick, the cameras caught. "Senator, you're fixating on something from my past," she said, her tone sharp but less confident. "I was young. I was reacting to a moment. But I didn't let that define me. I moved on. That's what I'm saying. People need to stop dwelling on what holds them back and start building their future." She leaned forward, her eyes locked on Kennedy as if trying to regain the upper hand. "You're making it sound like I'm betraying my own story. But I'm not. I'm showing what's possible when you don't let the past chain you." Kennedy didn't flinch. His voice remained steady, almost gentle, but every word carried weight. "Nobody's saying you shouldn't move forward, Ms. Owens. But moving forward doesn't mean rewriting what happened. You stood up for yourself because you were hurt, because you were targeted. That wasn't weakness, it was courage. So why call it weakness when others do the same?" The question hung in the air, sharp and undeniable. The audience leaned forward, some nodding, others whispering to their neighbors. Marcus Tate, who'd been quiet, interjected, his voice calm but firm. "Senator Kennedy's got a point. When we tell people their struggles aren't real, we're not empowering them, we're silencing them. I see it in my community every day, folks fighting to be heard, not to be victims, but to be treated fairly." Candace turned to Marcus, her smile tight. "Marcus, I'm not silencing anyone. I'm saying we need to focus on solutions, not complaints. Look at the data, opportunities are there. Black Americans are succeeding in every field. The system isn't perfect, but it's not the boogeyman it's made out to be." She gestured to herself as if her presence were proof. "I'm evidence of that." Holt nodded, trying to keep the conversation moving. "Marcus, how do you respond to that?" Marcus leaned forward, his hands clasped. "Candace, your success is real, and it's inspiring. But not everyone starts where you did or gets the same breaks. You filed that complaint because you had a voice and someone listened. A lot of people, especially kids in places like South Phoenix, don't have that. They're not heard, and then they're told to just work harder. That's not a solution. It's a dismissal." The audience clapped louder this time, the energy shifting again. Candace's eyes narrowed, but before she could respond, Kennedy spoke, his voice cutting through the applause. "Here's the thing," he said, his tone still calm but carrying an edge. "When you filed that complaint, you weren't just asking for a check. You were asking for accountability. You got it. But now you're telling folks who face the same kind of treatment you did that they're just making excuses. That's not fair, and you know it." Candace's face flushed, her voice rising slightly. "Senator, you're twisting my words. I'm not saying people don't face challenges. I'm saying they need to rise above them like I did. You're trying to paint me as a hypocrite, but I'm not. I've lived this. I know what it takes." She pointed to herself, her gesture emphatic, but there was a crack in her usual polish, a hint of defensiveness that hadn't been there before. Kennedy tilted his head, his expression almost sympathetic. "I'm not calling you a hypocrite, Ms. Owens. I'm saying you're forgetting what it felt like to need help. You didn't rise above by ignoring what happened to you. You rose because you faced it, called it out, and got justice. Why deny that to others?" The studio went quiet, the weight of his words settling over the room like a fog. Holt tried to intervene, sensing the conversation slipping toward uncharted territory. let's pivot to solutions," he said, his voice a touch too eager. "Senator, what would you propose to address these issues?" But Kennedy didn't take the bait. He kept his eyes on Candace, not aggressively, but with a clarity that demanded attention. "Before we talk solutions, we've got to agree on the problem. And the problem is, you can't tell people their pain isn't real just because you've moved past yours. That's not leadership, it's erasure." Candace laughed a short, brittle sound, her hands crossing tightly over her chest. "Erasure, Senator. I'm not erasing anyone. I'm telling people they can succeed despite the odds. You're the one stuck in the past, digging up old complaints to score points." Her voice was sharp, but the audience sensed the shift. She was on the defensive, and Kennedy hadn't raised his voice once. He leaned back, his hands still calm, his gaze steady. "I'm not here to score points," he said. "I'm here to ask why you'd tell a kid today facing what you faced that they're just imagining it. You know better because you lived it." The audience erupted in applause, not loud but steady, a wave of agreement that rolled through the room. Marcus nodded, his face serious but approving. Holt glanced at the producers, who were gesturing frantically behind the glass, aware that this moment was already bigger than the show itself. Candace straightened her smile, returning but less certain. "Senator, you're good at this," she said, her tone laced with sarcasm. "But let's not pretend you're speaking for everyone. Some of us have moved on, and we're stronger for it." Kennedy didn't respond immediately. He let her words hang, let the room feel their weight. Then, with a slight nod, he said, "Strength isn't pretending the past didn't happen. Strength is owning it and using it to lift others up, not push them down." The applause grew louder, and Holt raised a hand, trying to regain control. "All right, let's take a breath," he said, forcing a smile. "We'll come back to this after another break." But as the cameras panned out, the tension remained crackling like static, a promise that the clash was far from over. Candace's eyes darted to the audience, searching for support, while Kennedy sat back, his calm, unshaken, his point etched into the room's memory. The Real America studio buzzed with a restless energy as the show returned from its second commercial break, the audience still processing the charged exchange that had unfolded. The lights felt harsher now, amplifying the tension that clung to the air like static. David Holt, the moderator, stood at his podium, his smile professional, but strained, as if he knew the conversation had slipped beyond his control. Behind him, the producers huddled in the control booth, their faces a mix of excitement and anxiety, aware that this episode was no longer just a talk show segment, it was a moment. The audience sat forward, phones tucked away, eyes fixed on the panelists, Marcus Tate, his expression steady but alert. Candace Owens, her posture stiff, her smile a carefully constructed mask, and John Kennedy, the senator from Louisiana, sitting with the same unshakable calm that had defined him all night. His hands rested lightly on the arms of his chair, his charcoal suit still crisp, his demeanor as steady as a metronome. Holt cleared his throat, his voice cutting through the hum. "Welcome back to Real America," he said, glancing at his notes as if they could anchor him. "We're continuing our discussion on race justice and personal responsibility. Things have been intense, so let's dive back in. Senator Kennedy, you've been pressing Ms. Owens on her past. Can we shift to what this means for today's challenges?" Kennedy didn't rush to respond. He leaned forward slightly, his eyes meeting Holt's with a quiet intensity. "David, I'm not pressing anyone," he said, his Louisiana drawl slow and deliberate. "I'm asking a question that needs asking. If we're going to talk about what's happening today, we've got to start with the truth about yesterday. Ms. Owens filed a complaint in 2007 because she faced something real, something painful. She demanded accountability, and she got it. But now she's telling folks facing the same thing that their pain doesn't count. That's not a solution. It's a contradiction. The audience erupted in applause, not loud, but steady, a wave of agreement that rippled through the room. Marcus Tate nodded, his hands clasped tightly, as if holding back his own urge to jump in. Candace's smile tightened her fingers, brushing her lapel mic, for the third time that night. A nervous habit. The cameras didn't miss. "Senator, you're stuck on this one moment from my past," she said, her voice sharp but tinged with frustration. "I've said it before. I was young," I reacted, and I moved on. That's what I'm encouraging others to do. You're trying to frame me as someone who's denying reality, but I'm not. I'm saying we need to focus on what we can control, not what we can't. She leaned forward, her eyes locked on Kennedy, her tone defiant. "You keep bringing up that complaint like it's some gotcha, but it's not. I overcame it." "That's the point." Kennedy didn't flinch. His gaze remained steady, his voice calm but cutting. "Ms. Owens, it's not a gotcha. It's a fact. You didn't overcome by pretending nothing happened. You overcame because you spoke up, because you held the system accountable. And it worked for you. So why tell others they shouldn't do the same?" The room went quiet, the weight of his words sinking in. The audience leaned forward, some whispering, others nodding. Holt tried to interject, his voice a touch too eager. "Let's bring Marcus into this. What's your take on how we move forward from here?" Marcus leaned forward, his voice measured but passionate. "Senator Kennedy's hitting on something critical. When we tell people their experiences don't matter, we're not just dismissing them, we're shutting down the chance to fix anything. In my work, I see young people every day who feel invisible, who face barriers they didn't create. They're not looking for handouts, they're looking for fairness. And when someone like Candace, who's been through it, tells them it's all in their head, it's like pulling the ladder up behind you." The audience clapped louder this time, the energy in the room shifting again. Candace's eyes flashed, but before she could respond, Kennedy spoke, his voice still low, still steady. "That's exactly it, Marcus. It's not about victimhood. It's about honesty. You can't fix what you won't face, and you can't lead if you're pretending the problem's already solved." Candace laughed, a short, brittle sound, her arms crossing tightly. "Honesty. Senator, you're turning my story into a weapon to make me look inconsistent. I'm not denying that challenges exist. I'm saying we need to stop obsessing over them. The data shows opportunity is there. Black Americans are thriving in business, in entertainment, in every field. I'm proof of that. Why can't we focus on what's possible instead of what's wrong?" Her voice was sharp, but there was a tremor in it, a crack in her usual polish that hadn't been there earlier. The audience sensed it, their murmurs growing quieter, more attentive. Kennedy tilted his head slightly, his expression almost sympathetic. "Ms. Owens, nobody's saying you didn't work hard. Nobody's saying you didn't earn your place, but you didn't get there by pretending the system was perfect. You got there because you called out what was wrong and demanded it be made right. That's what you did in 2007. And now you're telling folks who are walking the same road you did that they're just making excuses. That's not leadership. That's forgetting." The applause came again, stronger now, a rolling wave that filled the studio. Holt raised a hand, trying to regain control. "Okay, let's keep this moving," he said, his voice tight. "Senator, what would you say to those who agree with Candace, who say the focus should be on individual effort?" Kennedy didn't hesitate. "I'd say individual effort matters, but it doesn't exist in a vacuum. You can work as hard as you want, but if the system's stacked against you, you're running uphill with weights on your back. Ms. Owens knows that she lived it. She filed that complaint because she knew the system wasn't fair. And now she's telling others to run that same race and pretend the weights don't exist. That's not honest, and it's not fair. The audience roared, the sound swelling, until Holt had to raise his voice to be heard. All right, he said, forcing a smile. Candace, your response? Candace straightened her smile, returning but less certain her foot tapping under the table. Senator, you're good at this, she said, her tone laced with sarcasm. But you're not speaking for everyone. You're speaking for a narrative that keeps people stuck, that tells them they're victims who can't rise. I'm living proof you can rise no matter what. I didn't let that moment in my past define me, and I'm not going to let you use it to undermine me now. Her words were defiant, but the audience's reaction was mixed. Some clapped. Others sat silent, their eyes flicking to Kennedy. He leaned back, his hands calm, his voice unshaken. I'm not undermining you, Ms. Owens. I'm reminding you. You didn't rise by ignoring what happened to you. You rose because you faced it, because you demanded better. And now you're telling others they don't deserve the same chance you got. That's the disconnect. The room went still again, the weight of his words landing like a gavel. Candace opened her mouth, then closed it, her jaw tight. For the first time, she had no immediate retort. Marcus jumped in, his voice steady. That's the heart of it. We're not asking for pity. We're asking for people to stop pretending the fight's over when it's not. Holt glanced at the producers who were gesturing frantically, aware that this moment was already going viral. We're going to have to wrap this segment soon, he said, his voice betraying a hint of panic. But before he could cut to commercial, Kennedy raised a hand just slightly, his voice rising for the first time. One last thing, David, he said, turning to the camera, speaking directly to the viewers at home. If you've ever felt like your story doesn't matter, like someone's telling you to just get over it, don't let them silence you. Your truth is real, and it deserves to be heard. The audience erupted the applause, deafening now as Holt scrambled to regain control. We'll be right back, he said, his voice nearly drowned out by the crowd. As the cameras panned out, the energy in the room was electric, the moment already spilling beyond the studio walls. Backstage producers were already pulling clips, knowing they'd be trending before the show even ended. Candace sat back, her arms still crossed her face, a mask of composure that didn't quite hold. Kennedy remained calm. His point made his presence unshaken as the world outside began to catch fire with the truth he'd laid bare. The Real America studio was a haze of adrenaline as the show hurtled toward its final segment, the air thick with the aftershocks of the clash between John Kennedy and Candace Owens. The audience sat riveted. Their earlier restlessness replaced by a focused intensity, as if they knew they were witnessing something that would outlast the broadcast. The lights still burned hot, casting long shadows across the polished stage, but John Kennedy remained untouched by the heat. His charcoal suit as crisp as when he'd walked in, his posture steady, his hands resting calmly in his lap. Across from him, Candace Owens sat rigid, her smile a fragile mask, her fingers no longer brushing her lapel mic, but gripping the armrests of her chair, a subtle sign of strain the cameras didn't miss. Marcus Tate. The community leader leaned forward slightly, his eyes bright with quiet approval, while David Holt, the moderator, stood at his podium, his notes forgotten, his face a mix of awe and unease. The producers in the control booth were already pulling clips, their headsets buzzing with chatter, about trending hashtags and view counts, aware that this moment had already transcended the confines of their Phoenix studio. Holt cleared his throat, his voice steady but tinged with the weight of the night. "Welcome back to Real America," he said, addressing the audience and the millions watching at home. "We've had a powerful discussion tonight on race justice and responsibility. Let's wrap this up with some final thoughts. Senator Kennedy, you've been driving a hard point about accountability. What's your closing message?" Kennedy didn't rush. He leaned forward, his Louisiana drawl carrying the same calm authority that had defined him all night. "David, this isn't about winning an argument," he said, his eyes sweeping the room before settling on the camera, speaking directly to the viewers at home. "It's about being honest. We can't move forward as a country if we're pretending the past didn't happen or the present doesn't hurt. When someone tells you their struggle isn't real, when they tell you to just get over it, don't let them erase your truth. You matter. Your story matters. And it's not weakness to speak up, it's strength." The audience erupted in applause, the sound swelling like a tide rolling through the studio and beyond. Marcus nodded, his hands clasped tightly, his face reflecting the weight of the moment. Holt turned to Candace, his voice cautious. "Candace, your final thoughts?" Candace straightened her smile, returning, but thinner, less certain. "I stand by what I've said." She began, her voice sharp, but lacking its earlier fire/peacut polish. "This country offers opportunities for everyone, and I'm proof of that. I've never denied that challenges exist, but I believe in focusing on what we can control: our choices, our work, our future. Senator Kennedy wants to dwell on the past, but I'm about building a better tomorrow." Her words were defiant, but they landed softer than before, overshadowed by the echo of Kennedy's clarity. The audience's response was muted, a few claps scattered among silence, a stark contrast to the energy that had greeted Kennedy. Marcus spoke next, his voice steady and earnest. "We're not here to tear anyone down," he said, glancing at both Candace and Kennedy. "But we can't build anything real if we're not honest about where we're starting. In my community, I see people fighting every day not for pity, but for a fair shot. Senator Kennedy's right. You don't fix a problem by pretending it's not there. You face it, and you work together to make it right." The applause returned stronger now, a wave of agreement that filled the room. Holt nodded, trying to wrap things up. "Powerful words from all of you," he said, his voice betraying a hint of relief. "We're out of time, but this conversation will continue beyond this studio. Thank you to our panelists and our audience." As the cameras panned out, the on-air sign dimmed, but the energy in the room lingered electric and unresolved. Backstage, Candace paced the hallway, her heels clicking sharply against the floor, her assistant trailing with a phone full of notifications she didn't ask for. Social media was already ablaze, clips of Kennedy's words, "Don't let them erase your truth," spreading like wildfire, racking up millions of views before the show's credits had even rolled. Hashtags multiplied, memes circulated, and accounts that rarely touched controversial topics were sharing screenshots drawn to the senator's calm, unyielding clarity. Candace's team whispered updates, trending number 27 million views on one clip alone. She didn't respond, her mind replaying the moment she'd lost her footing, searching for where it had gone wrong. Meanwhile, Kennedy sat alone in the green room, his phone face down on the table, buzzing with messages he didn't check. He hadn't come to trend or to spar. He'd come to speak plainly, to hold a mirror to a conversation that too often hid behind polished sound bites. And the country had heard him. Across social media, regular people, teachers, nurses, students, parents, were sharing their own stories inspired by his call to acknowledge their truth. A high schooler in Atlanta posted, "He didn't just speak for himself, he spoke for the parts of me I've been told to hide." A bar raised in Chicago wrote, "This is what it looks like when someone doesn't back down from the truth." The moment wasn't just viral, it was personal, resonating with those who'd felt dismissed, unseen, or silenced. Candace issued a statement later that night, posted across her platforms, "I've never apologized for my journey, and I never will. Yes, I faced challenges in my youth, but I overcame them by focusing on what I could control, not what held me back." Some want to weaponize the past to silence progress, but I won't let them. The response was swift and unforgiving. Replies flooded in. Overcoming doesn't mean denying. You can't climb the ladder and kick it down behind you. Her words, usually met with fervent support, were drowned out by a chorus of voices echoing Kennedy's point. Truth doesn't bend to a brand. Kennedy, by contrast, posted just once a simple image of himself in the studio chair, hands folded with 4 words, "Hold your truth steady." No hashtags, no fanfare, just a message that cut through the noise. Within hours, it had been shared millions of times, quoted in coffee shops, classrooms, and living rooms across the country. The lesson wasn't in the takedown or the drama, it was in the clarity. Kennedy hadn't shouted, hadn't mocked, hadn't performed. He'd stood firm, letting the truth speak for itself, and it had landed with a weight that no spin could contain. The real impact came in the days that followed, as people carried the moment forward. A teacher in Philadelphia paused her class to discuss it, telling her students, "This is what it means to stand up without tearing down." A father in Detroit showed the clip to his son, saying, "You don't need to yell to be heard, just be honest." The conversation wasn't about who won or lost. It was about what was revealed, the power of owning your story, of facing hard truths without flinching, of using your voice not to erase others but to lift them up. The lesson was clear. Real strength isn't in denying pain, it's in acknowledging it and building from it. Kennedy's words became a call to action, urging people to listen, to reflect, and to speak their truth with the same steady resolve he'd shown. And as the noise of the moment faded, that lesson endured a reminder that clarity and honesty can cut through even the loudest debates, leaving something lasting in their wake.